welcome to week 2 of our Year in the Bible reading plan. This week, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapters 16 through 36. Before we get there, we do need to backtrack just a little bit to Genesis chapter 15, because we pick up the idea that's going to be perpetuated throughout not only the rest of Scripture, but especially through these next 20 chapters that we're going to be reading together. It's the idea of covenant. Now, the word covenant in Hebrew is beret, and this word literally means to cut. We see this expressed very well in Genesis chapter 15 because it's the idea of cutting animals in half as a way of showing the covenant. And Abraham does this as God tells him that his descendants will be as numerous as the sand of the seashore, as the stars of the sky. He commands him to make a sacrifice, and so he cuts these animals in half and he lays them in a line. Now, the reason for this understanding and this picture word that we have of covenant is because each of the parties would pass through these animals that were cut in half, and they would each say, "Let it be done to me, and much worse indeed, if I do not keep my promise to you." And so when you see these animals torn apart limb from limb, and they're saying basically, if I don't hold up my end of the bargain, let me be torn limb from limb as well. But the interesting thing that we see is here in the book of Genesis chapter 15, as Abraham lays out these animals, as he lays out the sacrifice to God, it is God and God alone who passes through the middle of the sacrifice. In other words, saying, Abraham, there is no way that you can uphold your end of the bargain. There's no way that you're going to live perfectly. There's no way that you can fulfill this promise that I have made to you. Only I can fulfill it. And so God and God alone passes through the sacrifice, saying, I will keep this promise to you, even though it means that I will literally be torn apart, as we see in the person of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice that he made in order to fulfill God's promise to Abraham. But as we look at Genesis chapter 16 through 36, we're going to see the progression and the perpetuation of this covenant now that God has made with Abraham. In chapter 16, we're going to come across Abraham, and we're going to come across Hagar and Ishmael. Now, God makes the promise that he will have a son, and Sarah says, I'm way too old to bear a son, so let's give God a little bit of assistance, and I'm going to give you my maidservant Hagar, and through her you will raise up a line, you will raise up offspring. And this doesn't work. God doesn't need our help, and he, again, already showed this in Genesis chapter 15, as he was the only one to pass through the middle of the sacrifice. He said, Abraham, you can't do this. Only I can do this. No one but me can accomplish the promise that I have made to you. However, Abraham and Sarah decide, hey, we're going to give God a little bit of help. Does not turn out well. We see that this causes friction and strife in their relationship, friction and strife in the relationship of their sons later on, and friction and strife that continues for generations and generations as the Islamic and Muslim faith traces back their origins, they say, to Abraham's other son, Ishmael. So obviously, whenever God makes a promise, we need to trust him. We need to leave it in his hands, because whenever we try to get involved, we end up messing things up. And we see this in a big way here with Abraham and Isaac, Hagar, and Ishmael. Now, as we move on just a little bit from chapter 16, we see that Ishmael is not the son of promise. And so God establishes his covenant in an even greater way. He gives Abraham a physical way now of expressing the covenant, the special place that Abraham and Isaac will have in the line that God has set apart for them through circumcision. We're going to see this carried throughout the Jewish nation for thousands and thousands of years. And so as we go on through that now, we see that God is going to establish his covenant with Abraham through his own son that he will have with his wife, Sarah. In the book of Genesis chapter 17, we see that Isaac's birth is promised, that he will have a son, with his wife, Sarah. And in the midst of that, they both find this almost hilariously funny, because they are so old that there's absolutely no way that they could possibly have a child. And again, who's the only one who passed through the sacrifice? It was God. Who's the only one who can accomplish the promise and fulfill the covenant that he has made with Abraham? It's God, and he's going to prove that over and over again. So Ishmael is not the son of the covenant. He establishes the covenant through circumcision, and now he promises that he will send a son to be born, this son Isaac, who will be the son of promise. And ironically, Isaac is laughter in Hebrew, because both Abraham and Sarah laugh at the idea of God being able to do this thing that he has promised to them. But we see the irony whenever God comes through and fulfills his word. As we carry on through this, we're going to see that Isaac is born, and that after the birth of Isaac, Abraham sends away Hagar and Ishmael because of friction that's already beginning to grow. There was already friction between Sarah and Hagar, and now there is friction between the infant Isaac and the now young man Ishmael, as there is a displacement there of the son of promise. And so we see that now Hagar and Ishmael go off and they begin their own line, their own kind of life away from Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. As we continue, we're going to see now that Abraham's faith is going to be put to the test. God said that he could do it. Abraham tried to do it in his own means, saw that that did not work. God has proven now with the birth of Isaac that he and he alone is going to fulfill this covenant. And now he is going to put Abraham to the test. He is going to say, now you've seen what I've done. You've seen that I'm a promise-keeping God, and I'm going to tell you to do something that is absolutely almost unimaginable. He says, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and bring him to me and sacrifice him to me. Now, obviously for Abraham, this is another test of faith. He was faithful to God. We see earlier in the book of Genesis, as God calls him out from the land and calls him to a place where he has yet to go. So he leaves the land of Goshen and he follows the Lord faithfully. And we see him do the same thing here, that he just trusts God and he takes his son with him. He takes him up to the mountain. And as he prepares to sacrifice him, God stays his hand and he says, look, there is a ram in the thicket. I know that you trust me. You have shown that you have trusted me to fulfill the covenant. And so instead of sacrificing his son Isaac, he sacrifices now the ram which was caught in the thicket. And there's so much imagery there that's connected to Jesus that could deserve its whole own episode. But what we do see is that it is the son who is ultimately sacrificed, but it is not Abraham's son. It is God's own son who is sacrificed for the sins of the world, that he is that ram in the thicket, that he is the perfect spotless lamb. He is the substitution for all of humanity. He has taken our place. And there's a lot of rich beauty there that you'll see whenever you get to these verses in the book of Genesis. But as we move on from that, now we see that the covenant of God is passed down as Sarah dies, as Abraham passes on. He passes on this blessing to his son Isaac, and God reestablishes the covenant with Isaac in Genesis chapter 26. And the same covenant that he makes with Abraham, he makes with Isaac. He is perpetuating this, and we're going to see this carry out now as well to Isaac's sons, who are Jacob and Esau. Now, again, Esau is the oldest. He's the firstborn. He is kind of the front runner, you would think, to be able to receive this blessing and to receive the fulfillment of the covenant. But instead, it is Jacob, the unlikely one, the one who is kind of the mama's boy hanging out at camp, the one who is the heel grabber, the one who is a deceiver. He is the one who God ultimately chooses to redeem, chooses to change his nature and even change his name in order to carry on his covenant through Jacob, or who will become known as Israel. And I think God does this specifically because he likes to work in unlikely ways, in ways where you would have to say that has to be God, because there's no way that it could have been anyone else. And here in this case of Jacob, we're going to see that Jacob, again, the deceiver, the usurper, the one who is using conniving and manipulative tactics throughout his whole life, stealing things from his brother, hiding and kind of working situations around and manipulating things in order to get his way. He's ultimately the one who is humbled, who God uses to pass on the covenant through. Why? Because only God can do it. Because at the very beginning, as he established this with Abraham, he shows that it is he and he alone who will keep the covenant, and all of humanity will be broken. And even Israel themselves as the nation will over and over again break the covenant that they make with God, but God will never break his covenant. He is ultimately the one who is keeping this whole thing on track. He is ultimately the one who is going to fulfill all of the words that he has said and all of the things that he has promised. God and God alone will keep this covenant. And that's what we see as we continue through the book of Genesis, as Jacob now picks up the mantle of the covenant and is going to be passed down to his children as well. And that's where we're going to finish off this week as we look at the book of Genesis, chapter 16 through 36.